The first thing people noticed about Martha Hale was not her thin coat or the way her shoes had been patched too many times, it was the sound of the dishes. Every evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rusted grain silos at the edge of town, she would set 3 plates on the small wooden table inside her rented room. The plates were always empty. No food, no crumbs, just porcelain touching wood with a soft, hopeful clink, as if the sound itself could summon a miracle. To anyone passing by the cracked window, it might have looked like a habit, or even a strange ritual. But to Martha, it was memory. It was survival. It was the last thread connecting her to the life she had lost. She hadn't always been alone. Once, there had been laughter at that table, her husband's deep chuckle, her daughter's high-pitched giggle as she swung her legs beneath the chair. Once, there had been stew simmering on the stove and bread cooling on the sill. That life ended quietly and all at once, the way some storms do, no thunder, just a sudden collapse. Illness came first, then medical bills, then the funeral. The house went next. What remained fit into 2 cardboard boxes and 1 battered suitcase. By the time Martha arrived in the small prairie town of Red Willow, she owned little more than those empty dishes and the will to keep breathing. Red Willow was the kind of place people passed through, not the kind they planned to stay in. One main street. A diner that smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease. A hardware store with a bell that rang whenever someone pushed the door open. And beyond the town, stretching farther than the eye could see, were the ranches, wide open land, cattle moving like dark clouds across the grass, and cowboys who carried the dust of the plains in their boots. Martha found work cleaning rooms at the only motel. It didn't pay much, but it paid enough to keep the lights on in her rented room and to buy the cheapest groceries she could find. Some nights, that meant bread and water. Other nights, it meant nothing at all. She never complained. Not once. The motel manager barely knew her name. Guests rarely noticed her. She moved quietly, efficiently, leaving behind crisp sheets and the faint scent of soap. When she wasn't working, she volunteered at the local church, helping to organize donated clothes or wipe down pews. She never took more than she needed, which, most of the time, was nothing. People in town saw her as kind but forgettable, like a shadow that passed through their days without leaving a mark. Except one person noticed. Caleb Walker noticed the way Martha always lingered near the diner at closing time, pretending to read the same flyer taped to the window. He noticed how she smiled politely when people spoke to her, but never quite met their eyes. And he noticed the empty plates. Caleb was a cowboy in the truest sense. Broad-shouldered, sun-worn, and quiet in a way that suggested depth rather than distance. He owned a modest ranch just outside Red Willow, land passed down from his father, and before that, his grandfather. Life had taught him resilience early. He'd lost his parents in a farming accident when he was barely 20 and had raised his younger brother until the boy left for college and never came back. The ranch had grown quiet after that. Too quiet. Caleb filled the silence with work. Long days, early mornings, and the steady rhythm of hooves and wind. The first time he saw Martha up close was at the diner. She was clearing tables after the lunch rush, even though she didn't work there. When he asked the waitress about her, she shrugged. She helps out sometimes, the waitress said. Doesn't ask for anything. That stuck with him. A week later, Caleb found Martha standing outside the grocery store, counting coins in her palm. The look on her face, concentration mixed with quiet defeat, was something he recognized. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror after burying his parents, when the future felt too heavy to lift. Evening, he said gently. Martha startled, then nodded. Evening. You look like you could use a hand, he said, gesturing toward the coins. I'm fine, she replied quickly, closing her fist. Pride flared, fragile but fierce. Caleb didn't push. He simply opened the store door. Mind holding this for me? Confused, Martha did. He returned moments later with a small paper bag and pressed it into her hands. Extra, he said simply. Inside were canned soup, bread, and a small jar of jam. Martha's eyes filled instantly. I can't. You can, he said. And you will. Someday, you'll do the same for someone else. She didn't cry until he walked away. From that day on, Caleb found small ways to help without making it feel like charity. A box of groceries left on her doorstep. A note about extra work at the ranch when he needed help organizing supplies. He never asked questions. Never demanded explanations. And Martha, for the first time in years, felt something she hadn't dared to feel before: safety. The unexpected turn came one winter evening when a fierce storm rolled in without warning. Snow fell fast and thick, cutting off roads and knocking out power across Red Willow. The motel closed early, and Martha found herself walking back to her room in the dark, the wind biting through her coat. Halfway there, she slipped on the ice and fell hard. Pain shot through her leg, sharp and unforgiving. She cried out, but the storm swallowed her voice. Caleb found her an hour later. He'd been driving back from checking his cattle when he spotted something in the snow, someone. He stopped, jumped out, and ran to her side. Martha was pale, shivering, barely conscious. "Hey," he said urgently. "Stay with me." He carried her to his truck and drove straight to his ranch. The doctor couldn't make it through the storm, so Caleb did what he could, wrapped her in blankets, kept the fire going, and stayed by her side all night. When Martha woke, she wasn't in her rented room or the motel. She was in a warm bed, sunlight spilling through a window, and the smell of coffee in the air. "I didn't know where else to take you," Caleb said softly when she stirred. "You're safe here." Martha tried to sit up and winced. "I'll leave as soon as I can walk." Caleb shook his head. "No rush." Days turned into weeks. Martha's leg healed slowly, and in that time, something else began to heal too. She helped around the ranch as she was able, cooking, mending, listening. Caleb, in turn, shared stories he'd never told anyone. About his parents. About the loneliness that settled in the house after his brother left. About how the land felt empty without someone to share it with. One evening, as they sat at the table eating stew, Martha froze. There were 3 plates set out. She stared at them, hands trembling. I always set 3, she whispered. "I don't know why. I just." Caleb followed her gaze and understood. Without a word, he reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said. The emotional climax came in the spring, when Martha finally regained her strength. She packed her few belongings, preparing to return to her rented room. Caleb watched silently, pain tightening in his chest. When she reached the door, she turned. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, voice breaking. "You've already given me so much." Caleb stepped forward. "Martha, you didn't take anything from me. You gave this house life again. You gave me family." Tears streamed down her face. "I don't know how to be a family anymore. We'll learn," he said simply. Together. She stayed. Months later, Red Willow noticed the change. The quiet woman with the empty dishes now laughed easily. The ranch, once silent, rang with warmth. Children from town visited often, drawn by Martha's kindness and Caleb's steady presence. And one Sunday afternoon, as the sun set over the prairie, Martha set the table again. This time, the plates were full. Not just with food, but with love, belonging, and hope. And as she looked around the table, surrounded by the family she never expected to have again, Martha realized something profound. Sometimes, the greatest homes are built not from walls and roofs, but from acts of kindness that refuse to let another human being fade into the shadows. In a world that often rushes past the broken and the forgotten, it took one cowboy's quiet compassion to remind her, and everyone else, that humanity still has the power to heal, to restore, and to turn empty dishes into a table full of life.